Welcome to Lemore's Cards and Horrors, the best store for all your gaming and haunting needs. I'm Matthew, and today we're back with another episode of Creatures in Graveyards, talking to content creators and community members about their favorite cards and horrors. And today, my guest is Chris. Would you like to introduce yourself, Chris?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name's Chris. If you know me from Twitter, or I'm Chris Von Doom One. I usually find me talking about EDH. I guess Magic as a whole, but mainly just EDH and just doing my thing, vibing.
All right, all right. And what movie did you pick today?
An American Werewolf in London.
All right, so that's a classic, pretty well known, pretty beloved movie.
It's definitely one of my, arguably my favorite, not just my favorite horror movie, but my favorite movie of all time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's way up there for me. Just the special effects alone are just like, especially when you like start wrapping your head around when that movie came out.
Yeah.
And like, that and The Thing are like the movies for that. And if I remember right, they're both Rick Baker.
I believe so, yeah.
So.
Yeah, they definitely both, but I mean, with this movie specifically, the transformation scenes are probably the most iconic in horror. I would think it's got to be like top 5 bare minimum.
One of the coolest tattoos I've ever seen was the neck wound from his best friend.
Yeah.
I remember the guy wanted to do it so bad. He's just like, I will not charge the person that lets me do this to them. he's like, but I want to do it, and I don't want to show it off at a convention, and you have to live with it for the rest of your life. You have to live with this neck wound tattoo, professionally and all. So like, but I saw photos of it. It's really, really cool. It turned out really well. Like everyone talked about the transformation scenes, but even like the steady decay of the ghost of his friend as he keeps visiting him and haunting him, and it's just keeps adding layers and layers to the visual aspect of that film before like even touching on any of the themes. And for me, the humor, like everyone always points to the Evil Dead movies as being like that like classic like horror comedy kind of blend, that like this like that dark humor, and like they're excellent for that. But American Werewolf in London, like so tongue-in-cheek. And it's just it's got that quintessential 80s movie vibe to it too, where like everyone's young and kind of attractive, and they even fit in a tiny little bit of a romance plot line, but like it's like my favorite thing about it is it's like that's like 5-10 minutes of the movie too. So it's not even like, it doesn't even do like the focal point thing.
It's such a weird romance plot line too, where they just like see each other and they're like, okay, we're the two. I'm an attractive male, you're an attractive female. This is a romance plot now.
Yeah. It's like, hey, you met me in the hospital because you checked my charts.
Yeah.
Let's go get coffee.
Let me live with you now.
Yeah, pretty much. There's just so much about it that's so good, which always angers me about just how bad the sequel is. American Werewolf in Paris is just like, a lot of times when I bring up that movie, some people correct me like, oh, you mean Paris? I'm like, no, I mean London. I'm like,
really?
So yes, there's some younger folks who have only known that one.
Oh wow.
And that's okay. That's okay. That's what the old folks like me are for. It's to show them the way. I mean, even plot wise, outside of being like just like ridiculous and borderline underworld, like the CG, like the effects are just like, it's like comparing like the original Star Wars trilogy to the prequels as far as the effects go. It's like, here's some real stuff, here's some green screen.
Yeah, and this is like a movie that's not going to age, basically, unlike like an Underworld or something like that. Yeah, you mentioned that it has that quintessential 80s feel. I always like to say that 80s just like, they nail spooky a lot better than I think most movies do now, because it has like, especially like early on where they're walking through the fog,
Yeah,
before the attack. Like that kind of vibe is just so, like they just get it so right in movies like this, and like not as much now. I don't know why, but I do think more movies try to be scary now, and I think there is a bit of a difference, with a spooky vibe and a scary vibe. And I think
yeah.
they like really nail that with just like pumping in that 80s fog and the lights and
Like I mentioned, as someone who's a little bit older, I was born in '80, so like
mm,
it wasn't it. I'll never forget. But maybe closer to like 1990s, like a little bit closer to like 10 years old. I was raised Roman Catholic, so like I had to go to like cCD and stuff like that after school on Wednesdays. So like my dad forgot he had to pick me up,
mm,
and this was pre cell phones.
yep.
I didn't have a pager yet. There was a payphone, but I didn't have any change, so I would try to do the like quickly say, "You have a collect call from Dad. If you forgot to pick me up, come get me." But he wasn't picking up the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to make the decision to walk home.
Yeah.
And my town was small. It wasn't a very big town, one square mile big, actually. But it's the first time my dad did it. It's 9:30 at night. Again, I'm like 10 years old, very active imagination.
Mm-hmm.
My older brother babysat me a lot. So at this point, I have seen a lot of horror movies. And there's a field that I had to cut through to get home. Like from the path I had to walk, and it was getting foggy. So my point being, like when you're talking about that vibe, like as someone who actually like lived that vibe,
Mm-hmm.
like it's like movies like that, like just strike a different nerve, because it's like, yeah, like I know exactly what that feels like because I've been in that, because I felt it.
Yeah.
And I think like I think a lot of modern horror, I don't know if it's a generational thing. I really don't know what at the heart of it is, but it's not explored near as much, and I don't know if it's because people don't relate to it the same way that they used to. But it's definitely a thing. It's definitely from like that era.
Yeah.
I think like the Scream stuff is really where you started seeing it drift away from a lot of that.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother rabbit hole. And I'm not looking to shit on the Scream series. Like
No.
they're totally fun and fine for what it is.
I mean, that's something that can happen when you sort of innovate the way that Scream sort of specifically did. You can see a shift afterwards, and then it's not like Scream set out to kill what we think of as classic horror. It's just people really like Scream, and then we got a bunch of Scream clones, and then people really like Saw, and we got a bunch of stuff like that. I think there's definitely a more of a willingness to lean into like the theatrical, I guess, in 80s movies. I think that's part of it. 80s and
Sure.
before.
No, totally. Like I think like John Carpenter, like movies in general, for example, are like great epitome of that. Well, I'm trying to remember what was the last movie I watched with my wife. It was The Fog.
Yeah.
With like with the pirates.
Which is exactly the vibe, I think. Like I think movie wise, The Fog is like, there are elements of it I don't think work that great, but in terms of nailing that vibe, it is pretty much untouched. Where it's the entire, it's just, I mean, it
you take that vibe out of the movie, and most people don't sit through that entire movie.
Yeah.
Because it's not excellent, especially compared to a lot of his other works, where you're like, you have a certain expectation going in, which is different. But like we were saying, like the vibe is just so there. It's just so like oddly intense, and palpable, and very real. Like it's not very. It's like, no, like that is exactly what that feels like.
Yeah.
There's this natural just eeriness to that element, that again is captured really, really well, and it pairs so well with the theatrical, especially from a visual and actual effect standpoint. You can hide a lot.
Yeah.
That, you know, especially, you know, you think back to, again, late 90s, even some mid 90s, special effects, green screen work. You know, there are a lot of rough patches that just do not age well. And I think not just horror, but this stuff from that era of filmmaking, they did so well with the smoke and mirrors that they had, that it still looks good. You know, you can tell it's not, you know, you can tell it's fake. You can tell, like, you know, we're not going down making claims like that, but it just stands the test of time differently.
Yeah, it can help. We mentioned this on a previous episode where a lot of CGI, just like, I think it works better in genres that aren't horror, specifically because, like, once you get pulled out of a horror movie by anything that just doesn't seem right, like, once you're no longer, like, immersed, I think it weakens the rest of the movie in a way that maybe, like, an action movie doesn't get weakened as much.
Yeah, because there's still something enjoyable. Like, you know, a bad action movie, there's still, like, you can laugh. I'm not saying you can't laugh at the goofiness of a bad horror movie that you're pulled out of, but it's not what you bought the ticket for. And I think there's just different expectations with certain genres when you go into it. That I think is one of the reasons why a lot of, especially modern horror films, are so polarizing. Is, you know, everyone's got a different expectation now when they hear the term horror.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, really difficult to do it right and appease as many people as possible. And, like, you know, when we think about some of the more successful ones, like Witch, for example, it's just like, again, really kind of hold back, not relying on too many effects, bringing in that eerie feeling again, relying on nature, and just like, no, like, yeah, like isolation and uneasy situations at home kind of do not go well together, apparently. Yeah, like that's very human. People can relate to that.
When you can put people in, like I think that relates well to this movie, because, like, the situation they're in from the beginning is just a naturally scary one, even not including any supernatural elements, like being, you know, two friends in a strange land and nobody wants to help you out and you're kicked out essentially, and walking through the night. Like, it's very easy for that to be just scary on its own, and then the werewolf attacks.
I think some of us were talking about a little bit on online today, like just that travel anxiety. So, like, again, like, sure, they're in a spot where people speak the language, but again, strangers in a strange land. Just had a really weird encounter where they at the pub, and now they're, you know, it just kept sort of feeding into it. It's just, again, this beautiful intensity that just builds, dips, and then we start going back up the roller coaster. To the next payoff. And it's just delivered real masterfully. Again, just for people who haven't seen it, it's a really different, in my opinion, it's a really different horror film. Like, again, think of Evil Dead 2, where specifically Evil Dead 2 more than Evil Dead 1, where it's just it leans into the campiness without, it's much less campy than Evil Dead 2. But there's, you know, again, there's this tinge of it because it also just feels like this, like, John Hughes 80s film. And, you know, has this almost like Breakfast Club vibe to it. But it's about, you know, a werewolf and people get their throats ripped out. The ending is something. I'll try to not say anything about it for people who maybe haven't seen it, want to, but it's like, wow, like that's definitely an ending to a movie.
Yeah. I think one thing that sets this movie apart from other either horror comedies or, I guess, just similar movies, is that this movie has, compared specifically to Evil Dead, has like a really natural feel with everything, where it's like a lot of the humor isn't like, you know, set up punchline as much as it is natural people just talking and being funny, or weird
Yeah.
situation. Like it has more of that feel where these are real people talking for like most of the main characters, you know, and some of the others, but like that I think lends it to feeling more even than maybe something like an Evil Dead, where it's like, you know, when Evil Dead's trying to scare you and when it's trying to be funny, and this movie is just kind of doing both very naturally. It doesn't feel like it's trying too hard, and
Yeah.
that feeling with the characters I think helps sell it, because you do have like people who sort of act like normal people and they make jokes and they, you know, they get scared like in very real sort of ways, and it helps sell the horror, and it I think helps sell the comedy.
No, yeah, that's a great point. Like it's yeah, there's no like punchline to a joke.
Hmm.
It's just, you know, everyone's very kind of naturally, especially the main characters, are just very naturally charismatic.
Yeah.
Likable, relatable. Versus, you know, I think Bruce is very, you know, charismatic and likable.
Yeah, obviously,
but there's a setup and a punchline.
hmm
There's a setup and a punchline.
yeah,
This is again, like you pointed out, it's just, you know, the natural, like, charming delivery of things that will make you like smile or laugh. It's a quip that someone makes in the moment.
hmm
And yeah, like, natural, I think, is the best way to play it. Natural and relatable. I think that goes what especially again in horror, once you are able to relate to it and kind of again almost like sink into it a little bit and blur the lines, if it were, between, you know, what's happening on screen and how you feel. The more you can get into it, the more you can kind of let go. You know, again, using that roller coaster analogy, the more you can kind of just suspend yourself for a second and just feel the ride.
hmm Yeah, it does that really well. That I think a way that, like I said, a lot of other horror comedies don't, and it does make both elements stronger, I think. And it also, if I guess we'll give a spoiler warning here. The way that it has this natural sort of like, even when it's horrific, I think you still have these sort of jovial, you know, moments. And then you get to the ending, which is where the movie just isn't that anymore.
Yep. This is like, nope. Here's it, just like that thud.
Yeah, like it hits pretty hard. Like there's nothing. It's dark for this sort of movie, you know.
Yeah, it definitely. For anyone who's ever seen the alternate ending to Clerks, like that just completely changes the tone of the entire movie, and then it like just kind of flattens it, for lack of a better term. And this has a very similar effect, especially. I think a lot of modern horror, or just modern movies in general, like there'd be so much instinct from a director or writer to try to add like a tag or something after that and be like, oh, like here's a little even if it doesn't necessarily change the ending, here's this little something to kind of take the edge off.
You end on like a slightly different note.
And I think it's real ballsy that it just like, nope, like roll credits.
Because even like, I think now that kind of ending is more of a thing where people are more willing to have like a bad ending to, especially like a you know, American or Hollywood horror films, and not as much at the time. And I think it like, it's almost sort of like a response to like, well, is this a horror movie, is it a comedy? And it's just like, I'm gonna set the record straight right here. This is a horror movie, and nobody comes out on top in this movie.
No it's not great for anyone involved at the end. But again, it doesn't, you know, with all that said, like, again, for anyone who hasn't seen it, I hope it doesn't at all. I want him going in like not being able to laugh, not be able to like feel again like that weird almost sense of positivity that's in the movie. Because because it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't take away from that. It actually heightens it.
Yeah.
It makes it matter more. So just keep that in mind if you haven't seen it and plan on checking it out.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
Is there anything else you want to touch on with the movie, or do you want to go to your deck?
No, let's go to the deck. Like again, absolutely check it out. Great special effects. Ignore the sequel. Hit me up online. Let me know what you think about it.
Straight up not watch it.
Yeah, just ignore the kind of like when people talk to me about my favorite video games. I'm like, play Parasite Eve if you can.
Yeah.
Don't play the sequel.
Yeah, I tell people
it doesn't exist.
My Ginger Snap shirt. Watch this movie. Don't watch the sequel. But
read The Dark Tower. Don't watch The Dark Tower.
There you go. Okay, so what deck did you want to talk about today?
It's actually in front of me because I played it last night and realized that I messed up editing it because it cost me the game. My Muldrotha deck.
Okay.
It's probably my second favorite deck. It's the one. It gets played probably the most at this point, and I just said my second favorite deck, but it's kind of hard to actually say. Maybe it's just not just tied. My pitch for it, when I give people options to play against me, maybe haven't seen it. I consider a pretty fair Muldrotha deck. Like, all considering what I could be doing with Muldrotha and what I'm choosing to do instead, I'm like, it's pretty fair. It can be kind of slow. Sometimes I joke around. I call it slow Drotha. And it's become my go-to deck when we're looking for that like mid game, or even when it's the first game of a pod and like having that rule zero talk and you're not really sure exactly where some stuff's lining up. It's like, all right, well, I'm just gonna play this because it can hang. It can, some people who are racing ahead might choose to just flat out ignore me because it doesn't look like I'm really doing much. Yeah. So I can set myself up at my own pace at that point. And sometimes it gets blown out, and that's when I'm like, cool. Like if that's what you guys are looking for, like, I'll move on to a different deck. Like we won't hang here anymore. Again, that's not saying I haven't seen it like have the perfect hand and like just start being gross like quickly. The heart of the deck is it's a Sultai lands deck. Couple inspirations for it. I have always enjoyed landfall. One of my first commander decks was Nina and Den landfall. So Gruul landfall. Then I moved on to Get Rock Monster for a little bit, and then I moved on over to I was doing Jund with Windgrace for a while. My Corval deck had a slight lands theme to it when I was playing that a little bit. And then I was playing Muldrotha. I had a Muldrotha deck when it first came out. My play group kind of hated it out because it was that Muldrotha deck. Nathan, the Hermit Druid, the Hippo Prophet, if you will. When he recruited me to the Karuga cult, I did Muldrotha Karuga. Okay. And between playing that and playing a Grist list, it just made me realize just how much I really just missed playing Muldrotha, what I wanted to do with Muldrotha. I was tired of Windgrace at that point too. So I was like, let's just do Sultai lands. So I can, it's Muldrotha, so I'm looping lands from my graveyard a lot. Get Rock Monsters in here, Zorn Orbs in here. Tons of ways to get lands in my yard. Tons of ways of rip them out with Splendid Reclamation in here. I was going to try World Shaper, especially after the reprint, but I don't have a lot of sack outlets in this deck. So I'm like, smart people will not attack me when I have that out. Yeah. I also play a lot of effects that flat out just nullify combat damage in this deck. So I cut that. The other path to victory in here is it is a mill deck as well. Okay. So shocking no one when they hear Muldrotha. Yeah. But it a little bit of me and a little bit of you. Both crabs are in here. The rune crab is obviously for you. Human crab is, unless I know I can kill someone with it, is 95% of the time for me. There is a Thassa's Oracle in the deck, but as I always tell people during that pregame talk, there's no combo with it. Like, the closest combo in it is Hermit Druid.
Yeah.
And I run 6, and I even then I'm running 6 basics, which for a Hermit Druid deck can be a lot.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of ways to loop Fable Passage with Retreat to Hagara and Nicholas of Fallen out. So like I have like, I'll run 2 of each color as far as the basics go. Which is what cost me the game last night, because I messed up and actually added 3 of one of them. So when I Hermit Druided, I'm like, oh, I actually just hit a basic. Never mind. I don't win, and instead got killed on the next person's turn. Yeah, again, it sometimes it freaks people out. I've built it in a way where I can just power through Grave Hate as much as possible, just by just refilling the graveyard as quickly as I can. I've won a couple games with never even bothering casting Muldrotha because I don't need her to make the deck work, which is always a good time for me. Cosima, God of the Voyage, was really interesting to me when Cold Hunt got spoiled, and I played against someone's mono blue version of it. They were focused more on the other side of it, the Amonkeel.
Yeah.
But there's just something about the art. I had pulled a foil of the alt art, who is very angrily trying to grab that dolphin. And yeah, I've had games where when I bring him back in, I'll draw like 9-10 cards off of it, and it just feels great every time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm never upset seeing that card. So it's probably why I appreciate the power level of EDH I tend to play. I live in a weird zone where a lot of people assume I'm a cEDH player, where I barely play cEDH, and a lot of cEDH players label me as casual. I do not consider my decks all that casual.
Yeah.
So I just play what I like to play, and this deck is everything I like to do: sacrificing stuff, playing out of my graveyard, not having to be ultra gross, but still being a threat, and getting to play cool shit like I love Glacial Chasm. I think Glacial Chasm's a hell of a card. And it just fits beautifully here. And I got to add that new Angel of Suffering. 2 black, 3 generic.
From Kaldheim, right?
No, actually, it is from New Capenna.
Oh, yeah.
Damage to me is reduced to 0, and I mill twice that many cards. So like, you hit me for 5, I mill 10. Yeah, big fan of stuff like that. It's just cool. Again, it puts the hearts of fear in some fear in the hearts of some people, but nothing that I think is too gross for what she is capable of as a commander.
Yeah, I think Muldrotha kind of, it sort of does the value engine casual thing that like a lot of people want to do, and it just does it so crazy well. I think it can be sort of scary. I don't think it's an inherently like competitive sort of commander. Just by default, just you're running it, you're playing, it's too powerful. But it just like, I mean, it just, you start, once you get it going, you just feel your brain just start to get like, okay, this is nice. I like this. And you get that magic player value to, it's like win the game or get tons of value. I'm getting the value. And like, it just feels great. And I think you kind of mentioned how you get labeled by both sides as sort of the opposite. Like a casual say that you see stuff like that. And I think a lot of that is this guy mentioned on a previous episode where we've like made these sort of 2 buckets, like this dichotomy where there's this massive gradient in between, and maybe you're closer to one than the other, but there's so much in between. There's so much space that even in the two different sides, than just in casual, there's this huge gradient, and even in competitive, I think there's more of a gradient than,
especially now, like as more and more people are exploring competitive, or like you think back a couple years, like pre-COVID, just how at odds the two ends of the spectrum were. Like more like didn't even want to talk to each other, and now just the amount of like Lewis Stardust is a perfect example. Lewis hasn't been playing EDH for all that long, and she's like she's on a lot of cEDH streams. Yeah. She's like constantly talking to me about lists that she wants to make, play testing. It's it's awesome. It's great, but I also see a lot of competitive players trying to take, maybe not step all the way down to like battle cruiser.
Yeah.
But like, again, shouting Nathan out for a second, like that Karuga list, like there's a lot of pods that deck is still too competitive for, but not mine. Like I'm like, that is anyone who's ever seen that deck, I'm like, that is the perfect example of EDH I like to play. Where it's just like, yeah, you get the right hand, game could be over, like, I don't know, maybe turn 5.
Yeah.
And we just shuffle up for the next one. But very few games will go past that 2-hour mark. Like for me, that sweet spot for EDH games, like 90-ish minutes. And even if it's not wrapping up at that 90-minute mark, the gears are in motion. Like we were at the crescendo of the game at that point, and we are figuring out like who will survive and what will be left of them.
Yeah.
But you put it perfectly. Like for me, EDH, the analogy I like to make is like it's a swimming pool or the ocean. Like there's room for everyone, and like anyone who's ever attended a public pool or had someone who had like an in-ground one growing up, the pool's not the same depth at each end of it. Like there's the shallow end, and then there's that Olympic deep end where everyone's practicing for the Olympics. That's where people are playing like the most tuned, known meta cEDH lists. And again, like you pointed out, like you pull back a little bit from that end, and you get people still playing cEDH, but like who's testing out? I don't know. Some of like the Stranger Thing kids, for to see if they could do some weird shenanigans there.
Shout out to and just Kev's Will, who rocking time Steve with those.
Yeah. Exactly. Like it's not just a us community problem. I think it's a human thing. It's a human condition thing where you want to categorize stuff. It just makes it easier to quickly digest if something fits neatly into a box.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why I feel I have a pretty healthy relationship with this game is I'm not looking to fit it into a box. I don't want it to fit into a box. It's more fun when it doesn't. For me, it forces a little bit more pregame talk.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good thing. And I feel for people who talk to me a lot online about having social anxiety and how it's hard. It's like, I do too. Like I have a lot of social anxiety. Actually, I consider myself a bit of an introvert.
Yeah.
So I totally get it. But for me, it's a great way to get around that. It's a great exercise to help force me through some of those issues, and making sure that there's again variety in the pool just helps make it so we can have some interesting conversations. And again, we may have a couple of power mismatch games. That's not the end of the world. At any point the game can just end. You can be like, hey, actually this has gone completely awry from what I thought we were getting into. Like I'm not going to scoop and ruin anyone's effects. Like, so if you need me here to get a card draw, like assume I'm here for like another turn or two, but I'm just not really having fun, and I'm just going to go find fun. Yeah. And there's ain't nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be necessarily someone's fault because of that. It's just like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna check out of this one. It just isn't working. All of us together like this. This exact pod isn't working. I like playing with you guys. You know, back out. Whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever
Oh,
you gotta
hey,
do.
like I picked the wrong. Like I'm totally down for game 2 with y'all, but I absolutely picked the wrong deck. So like, can we come to a compromise on this first game? Like, figure out a way that like it's. I don't have to sit here being miserable for another 45 minutes, but like, I don't know. Again, if you really need me here, like let's figure something out.
Yeah.
Let's take it out. Like, let's hit pause on the actual game for a second and have some real life conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, like that's why I love a deck like this, is because it does cause some of that conversation. You know, people will start asking me about what's in the 99, like what I've got going on. Like, I know a lot of people have gotten really back in love with combat decks. So like, I try to make sure I'm like, hey, if like combat is your only win con and you're not in white, you should probably play like, if that's really what you want to do, I'm going to play a different deck, because if I will get one of the ways to protect myself out. Like, that's the way the deck is built.
Yeah.
And if you can't remove it, you're never going to kill me. So again, it helps those conversations, because the more I'm in these situations, the more I realize, well, people don't think or talk too much about it beforehand, as much as maybe we talk about doing it. And actually,
Yeah.
You know, there's one thing saying like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, and supporting it on Twitter. And there's a whole other thing when you actually get into a pod and you do it.
Yeah. And I think the more, like, kind of like you said, when people kind of have to do it, it gets people better at it, I think, and it gets people better about doing it. And it's pretty much only upside. Even if you're having a conversation you don't need to have, you're talking to the people that you're about to play a game with. There's not a downside to it.
No. If anything, it starts building. It's like starts building a lot of different relationships. Like when I think about my you know, where I guess I am in the community at this point, and a lot of it just from having games and conversations with people, and like just talking about our decks and just kind of going from there and getting to know one another. And it's, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, you'll meet your next best friend this way, but like you, especially with so many people still playing on Spell Table.
Yeah.
It's one of the best surefire ways to get consistent pods, is to get a good reputation as being someone who's fun to play with. You know, and I dislike using a word that term, because you know, now you get into the whole subjectivity of, well, what do you mean by fun and what matters, and like we could sit here for 3 hours talking about that. But you know, you get a reputation as being someone that is good to play with, that people will want to reach out to and invite you to a pod, will more than likely, if they're free, say yes when you invite them to a pod. And it's, you know, it's definitely kept me going, because my you know, just like so many other people, my play group kind of stopped during COVID, but I wasn't really enjoying my play group anymore at that point anyway. So yeah, it's a great way to be able to actually play the game that you like, is just talking about it when you sit down to do it.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of think you had mentioned about players with social anxiety, that being prevalent, or for those players like feeling like they struggle with it. I actually do think things like that, I think people can underrate how valuable it is to have like a really controlled sort of environment where, for discussion, like a Rule Zero conversation, when you get into a game where, like, Commander, you don't have to be inherently very social, but having like that little, just being able to get into a game and get accustomed to sort of doing that, sort of like a ritual of, hi, I'm my name, this is what my deck does, I got these cards, like, that can feel overwhelming to think about for some people to do, and being like, having that sort of space to do that and then do it, and everyone's just like, oh cool, yeah, that deck looks great, like, helps.
Yeah,
I think it
it helps
helps more than a
practice.
lot of people would realize, especially people who don't understand what those sort of feelings are like.
100%. Absolutely. Again, like I was saying, it helps you practice too, with like talking about your deck. Like the more, you know, I hear some people talk about how they struggle to actually like, pitch their deck or describe their power levels. It's like, I don't want to sit there and run down the 99 of my deck and find that one card that someone's gonna be like, I don't want to play against. But if it, for me, that's a little bit of semantics, because we all know what we're really talking about when we talk about like stuff that people don't like. When you bump when there are people who feel very strongly about cards, it's usually a pretty known card pool, or at least effects. And I think it's worth the 3 to 5 minutes at max it can take to give a good enough rundown of what your deck is, what your strategy is, maybe a like not even a handful of cards that you think you should mention beforehand, being in the 99. It's worth the outcome, because it just almost guarantees you. I won't say it guarantees you a good game, but you will have a better game than you would have without it. That I will say with absolute certainty.
Yeah, so I think even if you do all that and you find out your pod isn't exactly like someone says, oh yeah, I'm running like 2 stacks pieces and it's a mill strategy, like it changes or gives you more reasonable expectations for the game, and I think that is a lot better already than just like, okay, turn 1 Soul Ring into whatever stacks piece, Thorn of Amethyst, and just being hit by it because, oh, okay, I didn't know this was that kind of game. Yeah. Just like knowing and not knowing, even though the outcome is the same, can help you prepare and be ready for that sort of experience, and then I think make it more enjoyable. It doesn't feel like a shock to you that the game's suddenly different than you thought it would be.
No, agreed. Like I said earlier, like I'm playing a deck with Thess's Oracle in it, and people are okay with it.
Yeah.
Because I know how to talk about the deck, because I know how to, quell the concerns, and and I made the decision to not put the combo in there.
Yeah.
We touch on that for a second. Like, again, if you really want to do something, or really concerned about playing with certain people, like, at the end of the day, some of it is, your personal decision what put in 99. And I'm a firm believer in, I like to have decks that can fit almost anywhere. I kind of have a cEDH deck right now, and I have a bunch of unaltered precons that like I'm still going to tinker with, but very mildly, just to try to keep them at that power level. Even if it's not my preferred thing to do, it just gives me the opportunity to play with maybe people I haven't played before that I wanted to, or just play with new people and begin that journey of, am I going to show them what it's like to play maybe slightly more powerful Magic, or more synergized Magic, or are they going to, maybe they open my eyes and like, oh, you know what, Battle Cruiser isn't that bad, because I get to do like this weird thing that I've always thought was neat. It's you don't know if you don't try. And again, I think it's worth, the more you talk about it, the more you try it, it gives you, again, just more people to meet and interact with. And I know, again, some people that sounds terrible, but again, it's how I've met some of the greatest people I've played Magic with before in my life, just by saying yes to looking for ones in a Discord for someone that I've never played with before, and be like, yeah, let's go for it. Let's see what this game's like. And I've had a couple duds, but for the most part, they've been phenomenal games. And then now I have a lot of these people that I play with on the absolute regular. And it's fantastic. It's great.
Yeah, I definitely. We had kind of mentioned the massive sort of range of diversity that there is. There's not these 2 buckets, and like I absolutely 100% think the more you're willing to play outside of where you see yourself, the more fun you're going to have with Magic. Whether it's like going into a pod with a slightly weaker deck and showing people like, this doesn't exactly pop off here as well as it does in other decks, but I think I can show you guys I've got these sort of synergies that I can hang here. And then showing people who might tend to be higher power level players that like some of this low power stuff is pretty cool that you get to do, and then the opposite, like there's so much, like none of us are really going to get to actually experience the full range of Commander, and I think trying to is worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually haven't talked about it in a while, but at one point I took 6 months off of. So I play a lot of black.
Yeah.
Not just mono, but like just any deck with black in it, I will play. So for 6 months I played no black.
Yeah.
And just explored what other things can do, and it. I'm not gonna be like, oh, it made me a better Magic player, but it made me a better Magic player because it gave me insight, not just to mechanics and interactions, but it helped me understand why I like what I like, why I don't, maybe why I'm less a fan of the things that I don't like.
Yeah.
And why certain things would make me feel bad and why I shouldn't feel bad. It just really helped exercise a lot of like the baggage that can sometimes come with the format. So that's, I absolutely, again, encourage any kind of comfort zone you want to try to step out of. Like, I'm not, this isn't me saying if you're a cEDH player and you refuse to step down, you're doing it wrong, vice versa. I'm just saying, just try something. Again, as simple as not playing a certain color. Again, a lot of people, just because they're tired of Thoracle, will just not play blue black.
Yeah.
Because like if I'm gonna play blue black, I'm gonna do it. Because that's for me that's the point. We're not talking about fringe cEDH. Like people are just looking to play like the absolute top tier cEDH.
Yeah.
Like if you're in blue black, you're on Thoracle. So just a lot of those people just like, my answer to that is I'm just not gonna play blue black. And that's. Again, Nathan, that's we got Dab Farm. Yeah. Like he's just like, I don't want to play blue, but we're gonna do this. And holy shit, is that deck like a ton of fun. And for me, like that wasn't Nathan compromising his desires or what he wants as far as play experience. It was him finding a way to achieve what he wants differently than maybe he has in the past.
Yeah.
And I think that's cool. Like I think it's a way to maybe learn a little bit about, again, yourself and your relationship with the game and why you're here in the first place.
Yeah, you can definitely, like, there are so many different knobs to twist other than just the power level knob that can completely change your experience. Like, like you said, if you're playing cEDH and you're playing whatever blue farm every game and you're getting a little tired of it, but you really just prefer cEDH, switch to mono white or switch to mono green. It's going to be a completely different experience, I promise you. And you'll see what you like, even if you don't, even if you end up going back to blue farm, you'll see what, kind of like what you mentioned, what you like about these different things, what you don't like about them, what they look like from different angles. And then at the end, you're a blue farm player who's got mono green or mono white or whatever experience, and it's all upside.
Yeah, like for someone who doesn't play a lot of cEDH, I always joke about not understanding the meta, and it's just because I was never a good studier. Like I got great grades, but it was not because I studied. Because just kind of bullshit my way through things really, really well.
Yep.
So like I'll read people's primers because they put time and energy to talking about their decks. But like when people are like, here's the link to the database, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's I would say I guess maybe it's liberating, but it's again, it's nice. It's for me, it's better to learn by doing than to sit
Mm.
there and read. And just having a good community, like I found myself in, and the people I can play with that will teach me and help me learn as we go is very, very cool.
Yeah.
And again, all a payoff from what we've been talking about, like the last like hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you know, I think a lot of people's favorite stuff in the game is sort of a representation of what they like about the game, you know, and that kind of seems like that's the case with your Muldrotha list here.
Yeah, again, it's just, you know, without being in Grixis, my favorite 3-color combo. It's what I really just like to do in Magic, which is like look at as much of my deck as I can, play the game in almost like a subverted way from what's expected. Like that's why a lot of times, like, I'll talk about my wish that there was better ways to protect your graveyard or get chunks of your graveyard back after it was exiled.
Yeah,
because any deck can play Grave Hate because it's all colorless or attached to lands. Not all of it, but the best of it. Is, and some reason why I like playing Prosper as well is I just like playing from places I'm not supposed to.
Sort of breaking the rules.
With your I'm being all cheeky and sneaky and just snidely whiplash with my stash on the side because I'm playing out of my graveyard instead of my hands. You know, it lets me play a social game while still doing some of, you know, playing with some of the more powerful cards that I do like stuff like Life from the Loam, Hermit Druid, without, again, just bodying the table right away and being like, cool, like I'm only going to be able to play this deck now with the higher end of the spectrum, who are absolutely going to body me every time I bring it to the table, even though I am really not doing anything outside of like ramping a bunch and then trying to win via mill, and which I have done in this deck more than a few times. But like, it's, and I know people who are maybe a little less of a fan of my philosophy and approach will be, you know, we'll point to that as actually being a flaw, that, like, you know, it's a casual deck that can't be played at casual tables, but it's not competitive enough to be played at competitive tables. I'm like, but that's the point for me. Is that's the space I want to, that's the space I love, is it's not one or the other. And I haven't said it here, I've said it in other places where people will listen to me ramble on like this. I think casual is a bad term for everything that's not cEDH. For me, at this point, it's in its own pocket, like cEDH is considered in its own pocket, and those pockets are flimsy. Like, stuff bleeds out of them all the time, and into the mainstream that is regular EDH, and that is not good. That is not bad. It just is.
It is,
and it, you know, says it leaks into the mainstream of EDH. Both of them get diluted a little bit down into, again, what you see me typically playing. And again, maybe I tend to hover maybe a little bit closer to the deeper end of the pool. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to go hang out down in the 4-foot end of the pool either, and, you know, splash around with the kids.
I think there's a lot of strategies that fall in where, like, the power level sort of you're describing, where they work, where there's things that are sort of hated out of the lower power end of the spectrum, but they don't work necessarily in cEDH. Like, a lot of land destruction effects aren't, people who aren't as initiated might think of those as cEDH things. They're usually not. Nobody's really using their lands for mana. For the most part in cEDH, you may be playing 2 to 3 lands a game. And so land destruction, like land destruction in like a Kalia list, right? Like, you could build that for cEDH. It's hard to build that for the low end of casual play, and so it ends up sort of bleeding there in the middle, like you said. Like, I think there's a lot of strategies that sit there, and if we only look at the game as that, to separate areas of it, then you just have this whole middle ground that can't be played, you know. And that's a lot to leave on the table, and that's, you know, somebody's favorite deck you're leaving out.
Yeah, 100%. Like I mentioned my Corval deck like a while ago. But I remember when I first started I was on that deck when I was getting more and more involved in the online community of EDH, and a lot of really prominent podcasters like tore Corval apart, and to the point where like some of them started actually insulting like people who built it in the first place. And I'm like, that's odd, that's weird, to me. But it was enough to get me to like, all right, like I'm gonna stop playing this for a little bit, because it was absolutely a murder machine. But the way I built it, it wasn't the cEDH version of it. Yeah. Like, so I had a very limited amount of people I could play that deck with, so I took it apart, and it is a deck that I miss. And I've talked about before about potentially putting it back together, and I still someday may. But you know, I took it apart because at that point I didn't have a place to play it. You know, fast forward a couple years now, and it's just like I could break that version out against so many people I play with on the regular now, and it would probably actually get the shit kicked out of it. Like, can be compared to where it was and how I was playing it. Like the game is just like that now, and that's okay. But yeah, like again, there's just so much space in the middle. You know, there are commanders that are like, I love Zur, but I've never actually been able to build a Zur deck because, again, it's too strong for the lower end. And a lot of people are like, oh, Zur is kind of played out in the competitive scene. No one's really doing that anymore. And I'm like, but then there's you have your fringe cEDH, you have you know, just your tuned EDH, and then I actually slapped the deck together but never put it in paper. We could do weird things like, well, here's Zur Zombie Tribal, and the only enchantments I'm going to get are the ones that care about zombies. Or the zombies that are also enchantment creatures. And you know, let's just do some weird stuff. It's worthwhile exploring. There's room for everyone and everything. And again, this Muldrotha list, it for me just embodies my philosophy on about EDH as a whole. It's just like, here's a list that's not going to destroy you, but has a lot of scary cards in it. Let me show you how. I don't necessarily pull punches, but let me show you how you can play this game with a deck like this and not run a table over. But also let me show you how, if I'm going to bring it to a slightly more powerful pod, that, you know, if you play it right, you can hang. Yeah. You may not win, but you'll hang.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts on the list you want to mention?
I'm trying to think if there's any special callouts, any MVPs. Nissa Shadow Bows, it's great. I'm always excited when I find a card that just like synergizes so much with just everything I want to do, and this is like I have to put that in there. Yeah. There's been so many times where I'm like trying to make cuts to this list, and it's like pretty tight list for me at this point. And people are like, oh, like cut her, she costs 4. I'm like, yeah, you haven't played against me then, because you haven't said, anytime I've played it, people are like, oh, whatever, and then I do her abilities and they're like, oh yeah, like yeah. She
seems like the exact type of card I feel like you want in this sort of list.
Yeah, no, it's close to perfect. I will not lie. Yeah, I already mentioned Angel of Suffering. It's a great time, especially when you've got Get Rog Monster out, because I guarantee you, when you're running a deck with 40 lands, you will be drawing cards off of that little interaction there. So if anyone's some reason feels like messing with you, and last card I guess I'll shout out is you get to play fun shit like Unmarked Grave. Yeah, a little like, I'm like, that was just one of my favorite cards out of Modern Horizons. Was it 2?
Yeah, I think it was
1, 2. Like, Sure, yeah. Two mana for 2 mana buried alive, or sure, I'm only getting one. It has to be non-legendary, but like again, I mentioned that this is a pretty this deck loves playing Glacial Chasm. Glacial Chasm is a non-legendary land, and you can just out of the gate just make sure people cannot touch you.
Yeah. All right. Do you have any other shout outs or links you want to send people to?
No, I wish I did. I am still pretty much uninvolved outside of just running my mouth online.
Okay.
However, a lot of you are in a lot of the same discords I am, so by all means, always feel free to say hi to me there. It's the easiest way to get games with me as well, or just just at me.
Mhm.
But yeah, I guess the only thing I really want to plug is kindness. And happy Pride Month to everyone this fantastic June.
Yep. Happy Pride Month. Hopefully this comes out in June. I'm gonna try, at the very least, for
Well, I
that.
didn't know if it doesn't.
Happy next Pride Month if it doesn't.
Happy Pride every month.
Exactly. 100%. Thank you guys so much for watching. We've got a ton more of these on the way. Lots of more horror movies to talk about, and EDH, cEDH, standard, all sorts of decks. Hopefully leaning into different card games sometime soon too. If you want to be on here, or you have a content creator you want to be on here, reach out to me in the comments on Twitter at Lamore's Cards. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. That'll be it.